Welcome to A Spin on Offshore Wind, the podcast brought to you by Energy Coast, North East England's offshore wind cluster. I'm Caroline Lofthouse, and in this podcast, I'll be bringing you industry insights, project updates, and news from the UK's leading region for offshore wind and further afield. Don't forget to click the subscribe button so each episode drops into your chosen podcast app, or you'll find them on energycoast.co.uk. This episode focuses on innovation, its role in the offshore wind sector, and how the northeast of England has become a hotbed for innovation. My expert guest for this episode is Professor Simon Hogg, who is Ørsted Professor in Renewable Energy and Head of the Department of Engineering at Durham University. He also leads Energy Coast's Innovation Group, so is definitely the go-to person for this subject. I'll also be joined by Vaughan Di Mascio from VRAI, who will talk about how innovation is at the heart of their business. Simon, thanks for joining me. Simon, could you introduce yourself for our listeners, please?
Certainly, yeah. I'm Simon Hogg. I'm Head of the Engineering Department at Durham University, and I'm also the Ørsted Chair in Renewable Energy at the university.
This might sound like a simplistic question for a complex subject, but why is innovation so important to the offshore wind industry?
So the industry is still really relatively young, and it's still finding its way. So if you look at the progress the industry has made in the last decade or so, the price of offshore wind in particular has come down hugely. But we're not at the end of that journey. You know, we need to do more. Energy needs to be available in bigger quantities from offshore wind. It still needs to be cheaper if at all possible. And the only way that we're going to be able to deliver that progress is through innovation. You know, we need to continue to invest in improving the technology, making it cheaper, making it more deployable as well, in order to get the benefits that we all want stretching out into the future.
Yeah, totally agree. And North East England has a history of innovation and invention. For our listeners from outside of the region, can you give us a kind of a potted history of why this is the case?
Well, I think, you know, the North East was at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of that was built on coal, obviously. And if you think of what sprang from that, certainly, you know, the first passenger railways really grew out of transport for the coal industry, essentially, and power generation as well has always been at the heart of what we've done. We've had so many pioneers here within the North East, just to name one. Charles Parsons up at Newcastle with the steam turbine, you know, one of the pioneers of steam turbine technology, the technology that's still used largely for conventional power generation today, right here in our region. So we've always had a focus on innovation, particularly in power and industry within the North East, and I think the offshore wind industry here in our region is just the latest incarnation of that.
Brilliant, yeah. And wind power is at the heart of achieving net zero and therefore requires quite a lot of innovation. How is the sector's supply chain in the UK and particularly in the region, how are they contributing to that?
Yeah, so we are, I mean, obviously the big wind turbine manufacturers are companies based outside of the UK, but they are now beginning to invest within the UK. And certainly close to our region in Hull, we've had a huge investment from Siemens Gamesa in the wind turbine manufacturing and assembly plant there. So there is economic benefit coming to the region from that side of the fence. But in terms of the supply chain, there's so much that is required in order to deliver the targets for offshore wind that the local companies within our region can contribute to. So things like cabling, for example, there's an awful lot of the sector in this region that contributes to various areas of cabling, whether that's digging the trenches, whether it's making the cables themselves, whether it's making systems that protect the cables. All of those companies are represented here in our region and have a role to play in the industry moving forward. And exciting things are happening. You know, at the moment, the vast majority of turbines, offshore turbines that are installed worldwide are fixed bottoms with the towers going into the seabed. But floating wind is coming. Floating structures are with wind turbines on top of them are going to be much more prevalent in the future, and there's some exciting opportunities for our region in that space as well. Anchoring, for example, obviously if the structures are floating, they've got to be anchored to the seabed, and there's a lot of expertise built up mainly in the oil and gas and shipping industry in that area that can be transferred into floating wind in the future.
So do you really see the North East England supply chain supporting fixed bottom and floating in the northeast of England, but then taking that to globalise those opportunities as well, Simon?
Absolutely. We have every potential here in the northeast to build on our existing skills and expertise and our existing companies in order to position this region really as the world leader for some of the technologies and some of the services that are going to be needed by the industry moving forward. So that is the exciting opportunity that we have to grasp right now.
Brilliant. And in your role at Durham University, how do you see sort of business and academia working together in the innovation space?
So we obviously partner with many industrial organisations through the university. We contribute in many sectors, and offshore wind is one of them. So the engineering department at Durham has been active in offshore wind research for 2 decades now, and that activity has continued to grow over time during that period. So I think, the universities, though, themselves, they tend to operate very much at what's called the low technology readiness level. So basically innovative new ideas that may or may not have the potential to develop into services or products that go into the industry. The universities operate at that level, and trying to really do the blue skies thinking and to unearth or unlock the next possible piece of technology or way of doing things that industry can then pick up and use. And there are countless examples of that going into the sector. So if you wanted me to name one, we had a PhD student who completed his thesis at the university in 2013, and he was developing in collaboration with the offshore renewable energy catapult at Blyth a way of doing fatigue testing on wind turbine blades, which was more accurate and faster than the current standard way of doing it. And that technology has been transferred to the Catapult Centre now. In fact, the student is an employee of the Catapult Centre, and that may well work its way into the testing standards for wind turbine blades in the future.
Excellent, that's great. Great news for the region and great news for the industry. In terms of Energy Coast, which is North East England's offshore wind cluster, could you tell us a little bit about the Energy Coast Innovation Group, please?
Yeah, so Energy Coast as a brand has existed for many years before the cluster, and when it became the cluster, I think 2 years ago now, more or less, the easy bit, if I can say that, for Energy Coast was the business development side of things, because that was its history. It was a business development networking organisation, and very successful at that. When it became the cluster, we needed to add 2 further strands to it, one around skills, and then the one we're talking about today, innovation. And so I launched that innovation group about 18 months ago now, and we've really been trying to mobilise within the region to start to develop an innovation strategy that enables us to really support and help position the region in the future as the go-to area, the world leader in some of the technologies needed to service the industry moving forward. And I've already talked about a couple of them, cabling, anchoring, these sort of things. But there's many more activities other than that. Another one that springs to mind instantly would be virtual training. So there's lots of skills and competencies within the northeast here that could be used in that space. Clearly, if you can train offshore wind operators onshore in a virtual environment, then not only is that cheaper, but it's also, from a health and safety point of view, better. Subsea inspection vehicles are yet another area where, mainly through the oil and gas industry, this region has a lot of companies acting in that space, developing often autonomous vehicles that can go and do both subsea and airborne inspection as well. So that's another area, I think, if we get an innovation strategy for the region really focused on the needs of offshore wind, we can position the region as a world leader in that space. And not to say it isn't in many respects. In some of those technologies, a world leader already.
Yeah, and I know the other strand that you were just talking about, the Energy Coast Skills Group as well. How do the Innovation Group and the Skills Group work together for the future to capitalise on the future opportunities for offshore wind?
Well, there's clearly representation jointly in the leadership teams of both of those groups within Energy Coast. I myself, I work for an education provider principally. That's what a university is, and so we are certainly active in the skills group. Durham University, not the only university in the region. We're blessed with 5 universities in this region, and some of them have a very strong presence on the skills group alongside Durham University. So I think there is a lot of interaction between the two, but really my passion and where I think I can contribute most to Energy Coast is through the innovation event agenda.
Yeah, and I know we've organised NOF, the organisation that owns and operates Energy Coast. We've organised some innovation group events where we've networked and we've had some great presentations. What's your sort of thoughts on how we've brought companies together? Is there some collaboration now happening between SMEs and academia together as a result of those events?
Yeah, I mean, the events we've run so far, you allude to there, they've all been very successful. I think all of us have been delighted with the take up of those events. Even during COVID, when we had to run them online, we still got very good attendance, and our most recent one was our first face-to-face event for some time now, and again the attendance was fantastic. So what that shows you is there is a real passion in the region to engage with the innovation agenda. The conversations are happening, and what we're really after, which is what you just alluded to in your question there, which is actual innovation activities and projects starting within the region. That is beginning now. It's at if I'm honest, it's still at a relatively low level, but that's bound to be the case when you're just starting out with something new. So we're still finding our way to some extent, but there's some exciting prospects in the near future anyway for fairly large and substantial project ideas to form within the region, and for us to go chasing for funding for those from the large funding organisations.
Yeah. So Vaughan, thanks for joining me. I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about VRAI and what it does in terms of the offshore wind sector?
Sure, thanks for inviting me. Very happy to be here. So VRAI is a virtual reality company that works primarily with jobs that are high risk. So we work a lot with people like the Army, the RAF. We create simulators that try to de-risk the training exercises that people go through to complete their training before they go out to work. Recently, we've moved our technology and our thinking into the wind sector, so we're trying to now apply what we do to training technicians for offshore wind.
Yeah, excellent. That's great. Thank you. And how have you what led you to think of the offshore wind sector? How does your innovation, your technology, how does it really fit in that sector?
I think primarily it was the risk factor for people. It's obviously quite a risky experience to, first of all, be training up on an offshore turbine. But then the kind of first experience when you're out there, it can be quite a shock with the elements, the height of the facility that you're working on. It's obviously quite an isolated experience as well for people. And also, traditional training doesn't give you that kind of immersive feel. So, the first time that you're out there at sea could be quite a shock for you before you actually get started on the work. And then obviously with the kind of immersive simulation that we can do, we can take people inside the facility, so you can feel exactly what it looks like and where all of the kind of key elements of the turbine are before you're out there at sea. So we were thinking that the kind of more traditional industries that we work in for simulation, like things like flight simulators, trying to bring that to an industry that doesn't really have that tradition of working with simulation, but we could see that there could be quite a good fit for what we do against the demand that the industry's got for training quite a few extra technicians over the next few years, because wind industry, wind power, thankfully, is in quite high demand and needs to scale up really quickly. to meet the energy demands. Sorry, to meet the energy demands, both here in the UK, but throughout the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, and health and safety is so important for the industry. You're kind of de-risking, taking that sort of human element out of it, where people are put at risk doing the training aspects, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. So, excuse me. I think it's more the kind of what we would think might be the kind of surprise element or the shock factor for people when they're out there for the first time. And if we can assist with getting people into that mindset of exactly what they're going to be working with, exactly what that environment is, as best as a simulation can. There's a lot of good evidence that VR and simulation training gives you that experience far better than a traditional classroom environment might. Which is not to say that we're trying to replace the traditional training in classrooms, but I think you can see there is a good element of that immersion, being able to help with de-risking things, but also what we've seen through the pandemic, where sometimes it's just not possible to get people together in the same room. It might be not possible for people to travel to a training facility. And the idea that with a VR headset that you could ship to anywhere in the world, you can allow people to do that training a lot more remotely than they might have otherwise been able to do.
Yeah, so in terms of kind of like international training, you can actually you can send the headset overseas and train people. So you've opened up your kind of opportunities for export markets as well for VRAI, I would imagine.
Yeah, we've been looking at that. I think there are really good opportunities in America, where there's been a lot of investment in wind proposed very recently, particularly down the East Coast, and also throughout Europe. And I think South Korea looks like quite an interesting market for us as well. And there are lots of grants available, lots of funding bodies that are working with companies like us to encourage us to work in those markets. So yeah, I think everything looks pretty good, but it's obviously all driven by that demand for wind energy everywhere.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about funding, because you've moved into the sort of the offshore wind space. What kind of support have you had to develop the innovation? What kind of programs have you accessed?
We've had a lot of encouragement and support from funding bodies. So OWGP, we worked with them last year to develop our initial prototype for wind. They were great to work with. We were recently inducted into the Launch Academy cohort for this year, and that's an excellent program for a company like us that we're still technically a startup. We've been around for a few years now, but particularly stepping into a new industry like wind. The program that they've got us on is just giving us such a great sort of foundation with the information that we would need: industry contacts, business planning, market research, everything that we could want, really. And then there are also government grants available. So Innovation UK, I think, is a great one. And I mentioned South Korea earlier. They've got a fund specifically to encourage businesses like us to work with partner companies in South Korea for research and development. So although we've only been working in the space for about a year now, I guess, we've just been given a tremendous amount of support and access to funding. So I think, if you have a good idea and your research and development looks good and you can validate what the results would be, then we're very keen to do that. I think the funding is there to help you get to where you need to be.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of support out there. In terms of, I'm thinking if there's any SME listeners, SME businesses listening to the podcast, Vaughan, in terms of accessing those funds and those programs, is there any advice and guidance that you could give a company to tap into the programs and the funding mechanisms that are out there?
But we found it fairly easy. So we just get ourselves on as many mailing lists as we can, and then we get updates on when funds have become available or when new rounds of funding are likely to come out. There's usually a decent enough lead-in time of probably thinking about 3 months from start to finish, which is, I think, quite a good period of time. You get to put your proposal together, do your pitch, refine things if you need to, and then find out whether or not you've actually got the funding. So it's a relatively straightforward process. But also, very happy for people to talk to us. I think we've shown that it can be done in a short space of time from almost a kind of standing start. So yeah, if anyone wanted to get in touch with us as well, I'd be very happy to talk to them about the process.
Oh, that's brilliant, Vaughan. Thank you. Energy Coast is North East England's offshore wind cluster. We're always looking for ambassadors. So we would love to have you as an ambassador for innovation and supporting SMEs to access funding. That would be great. Thanks, Vaughan. In terms of I'm thinking about North East England, and I know that you've got your Gateshead office. In terms of North East England, what's your views on our region and how innovative we are as a region?
Well, I'm from the North East, so I'm always going to say we're great. But I think we are in terms of technology. There are some fantastic tech companies up here, and also some great universities producing graduates who are ready to move into the industry almost from day one. I've worked with some fantastic graduate recruits up here from all of the universities. But there are companies who are doing great things, startup companies right through to larger companies. Obviously, we've got big companies like Sage up here. But then you can see smaller companies, startups like Zerolite doing great things in automotive. You've got Opencast. I'm talking about companies that I know, some companies that I've worked with, but Morstons as well, a great kind of general IT company. And these companies are all interested in providing fantastic services to customers, but also they give back, I think, to the region in lots of different ways. Yeah. All really keen to recruit graduates from universities, from all over the world, obviously, but I think particularly working with local universities, it's a really fantastic community up here, supporting each other in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, and we've got some fantastic transferable skills from other markets like automotive and IT, like you've just mentioned, coming into the offshore wind space to bring those new ideas that are needed to innovate, to keep us growing as we go bigger as an offshore wind market further out from shore. So that's some great companies that you've listed there. And Simon, in terms of what kind of ideas do you think for the thinking about the future gaze and for innovation, what kind of new ideas do you think need to come through from the supply chain to kind of really take our offshore wind sector to that next level? Well,
the supply chain in the region is largely SMEs, and the trick to making this work, I think, is to getting the right people around the table. Small organisations don't have the luxury of being able to think about innovation over the timescales that large organisations do. But really, within the northeast, where the economic benefit to the region is going to come from, it's from the smaller supply chain type companies. So our role now is to try and create an environment whereby we can get not just local SMEs around the table, but also the big developers or the big OEMs to start discussing aspects of innovation that are needed for 3-5 years down the line, and start to form the projects that will make that happen. I've talked about cabling many times, but that's a classic example. There's lots of challenges within the industry at the moment from current experience, and in order to turn those difficulties into a real positive, if we get the right people around the table from all those scales of different types of organisations to look at where we are with cabling and what needs to change in order to have cables that are not only fit for purpose but world-leading cabling solutions for floating wind 5 years down the line, then that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to take stock of the state of various aspects of the supply chain and then pull people together in order to engage in innovation projects collectively that are going to position this region where we all want it to be.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Simon. And sort of finally, you were talking about challenges and solutions. If a company has got an innovative idea, a gem of an idea, a thought, what advice and guidance would you give them? Is there somewhere where we can direct them to kind of get that idea from a concept a little bit further through to sort of fruition?
Yeah. So in addition to the events, we've also launched a Teams-based discussion forum as well. So there is if you can access this via the Energy Coast website, find the links there. But there is now an online forum whereby any organisation or any person indeed that has an innovation idea can post it on this Teams channel, and others can see it there. Now clearly there are lots of issues around protecting intellectual property and confidentiality there. However, so we know that people aren't going to put great detailed innovation opportunities there, but a paragraph or two describing in very general terms what they see the potential innovation need to be. That should then get discussion going on the forum, which should enable us to identify, whether it's 2, whether it's 4, whether it's 8 other organisations within the region who have interests in engaging in discussions about how we might form projects in that area. Then we can sort of take that offline, and those more detailed discussions can happen under non-disclosure agreements or whatever in a more private and controlled environment. So the channel itself, that's what we're trying to do with it anyway. We're trying to have pretty much an open access forum whereby anybody can throw up any idea and then run it in such a way that when we get to the point that protecting companies and individuals' interest becomes an issue, then we take it offline and do it in the way I've just described.
Thanks, Simon, and also Vaughan Di Mascio for his time. I'll be joined by more guests in future episodes that will expand further on the impacts of innovation and its importance for supply chain companies. And don't forget, you can subscribe to A Spin on Offshore Wind on all good podcast platforms, or you'll find it on energycoast.co.uk. That's ENERGI, coast, all one word, .co.uk. Join us next time for A Spin on Offshore Wind.